Hello. You're listening or watching the Punk Rock Libertarians podcast, episode 116. We are here tonight. I'm Matt Bergman. We've got Alex Miller.
Yo.
We've got Kyle Wagner. We got the man Kyle Wagner.
Hey, guys.
Yeah. And we've got a newcomer to the program, CW Enser.
What's going on?
Yeah, thanks for coming out, CW.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Sweet,
Appreciate
dude.
it.
Yeah, man. Hells yeah. So, like, this week in our neck of the woods, we're all from, like, the Maryland area. Harford County cops were actually apparently going around, and I believe, wasn't this in the middle of the night?
It was. Yep. It was in the middle of the night. I don't know exactly which neighborhoods, but it was at, pretty, middle class, suburban neighborhoods in Harford County.
Yeah, and they were checking car doors to see if they were unlocked.
As a public service, though, right?
Yep. And they apparently found 61 cars that were unlocked, and they made a post about it, and the post got quite a bit of heat. A lot of people shared it. A lot of libertarians were commenting on it. Property rights issue.
Yeah, I've heard that they were, like, waking people up and shit.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, like, mixed things, but definitely that they were going on people's private property. They said no cars were searched. Don't know for sure if they actually opened anybody's car door with the handle, but,
Yeah.
still, without the property owner's consent.
Yeah, I mean, and there's trespassing, too, walking into
Absolutely.
property.
Yep. And I made a post, I commented on it, and I said, if a private citizen were to do something like this, you would call it breaking an entry and lock us in a cage for it. But when you do it, it's, a safety measure to make sure that people are aware and that we're, making people more safe. But it's still a crime, and you can't have equality under the law if they can break the law to enforce the law.
There's definitely a creepiness to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember, so I lived in Texas for 6 years, and most of it was outside of Austin. It was a pretty rural area, and had pretty good relations with my neighbors. So most of the time, we would leave one door unlocked. Just in case your neighbor needs something is there. But that's still not an open invitation, So that's what I think is creepy about what the police did.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't get it. Like, so it's actually illegal to leave your car door unlocked?
It's illegal?
Is it illegal?
No. I wouldn't.
No, but it is illegal in Maryland to go into a convenience store or park somewhere and leave your car running and go in, which people used to do all the time. I'm sure you used to see people do it,
Yeah, actually, I heard it's actually illegal to turn your car on in your fucking driveway and then go back inside. Like,
I didn't know that.
To warm your car in the winter? Yeah.
I've seen those stories. I don't know.
It's illegal to leave your car running in Maryland when you're not in it.
I thought, wow, I didn't realize in your own driveway. I didn't realize that was part of that.
Yeah.
Fucking.
Well, they have those auto starters where you just like hit a button and your car starts remotely.
Yeah,
when you're not in it.
Want to warm your car up in the wintertime?
Yeah.
Do you use it?
It's probably after those that this law was
you're
made.
a criminal.
Well, so I have a 2.5-year-old, and he's very particular about the climate of the cars. I'll run it a few minutes early to get it AC or heated or whatever. Yeah. So now I gotta watch out, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's all Maryland or just some counties, but I know some places in Maryland, it's actually, people have gotten tickets for it.
Yeah, I came out of Wawa one time. I just ran in real quick to grab a drink. This was in Bel Air, and I mean, just ran in real quick and came back out, and there's a state trooper hanging by my car, and he gave me a little lecture on how it's illegal, and he wasn't gonna write me a ticket, but now that I know, don't do it again.
Wow.
Oh yes, sir. I'll never do that again.
Damn. Yeah, it's really fucking insane because it just seems like the cops are committing actual crimes to manufacture this so-called crime that you're committing by leaving your car door unlocked. Now, for me personally, like I have a fucking like 95 Honda Civic.
I have a 98.
Exactly. So like I figure I just don't leave anything of value in my car.
Absolutely.
So so why not just leave the doors unlocked and save somebody the trouble of breaking a window and costing me a whole bunch of money?
Right, because ultimately, if you leave your car unlocked and it gets broken into, ultimately, I mean, that's your responsibility.
Yeah, it's your responsibility, and
right.
I think that doesn't that make sense though? That's the way that I would want to handle that. Maybe just not leave anything in there.
Right.
And people can go in and look.
Do you need a cop to come skulk around your property in the middle of the night
No,
and touch
of
your
course
car?
not, yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and somebody made the argument to me when I posted about it that, oh, well, it wasn't private property because their cars were parked on public streets. I said, you do realize that the car is still their private property, right? And you know, it's just people don't, you know, so.
Yeah, but there's a good legal history of using the public realm as a justification to make those lines a little blurred.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think that they were charging them with any crime or anything. I think maybe it was just a sort of a, hey, keep an eye out, guys. Make sure you lock your car doors. But I definitely think they overstepped their bounds, and they shouldn't have done this. So hopefully, you know, there's a backlash and they don't do it again.
Yeah, I mean, community outreach is one thing, posting some flyers, you know, making some announcements on their website, holding a town hall meeting. But, you know, so, I mean, I know a lot of Harford County cops, and, you know, I think some of them were pretty, honestly, a little disturbed that they were asked to do things like this, you know. So I don't know who's making these decisions, but...
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. But at the same time, like, you know, we were having this conversation with Arvin Vora, this exact same conversation, only it was mostly about the military. And, you know, it's like if those cops, they don't want to do it, you know, so... I mean, isn't it kind of fucked up if they still do it? You know, I mean, it's in other words, like how good, like how good of a cop can you really be? You know, I mean, if somebody were a really good cop, you know, they just wouldn't do it, and then they'd probably get fired for disobeying an order.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you violate your own moral code, if you know it's wrong and you still violate your moral code to get paid, I mean, some people don't realize those ramifications till much later down the road. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it takes time for them to really think about that, but yeah, like you're saying, I mean, it's still not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and also it can affect you. Like you make that justification. That's a line that, you know, in your moral compass, in your brain, had been there for a while. You know, you cross that, and I mean, I guess there's always extremes. Maybe I could see myself doing it as well, but once you actually do it, you cross that line. The next time's a little easier to cross.
Yep.
So.
They probably, I mean, they may be uncomfortable with it, but like that's true of any job. You can be asked to do something you don't really want to do, and you have to make the decision yourself. Is this something I'm willing to continue to do for a paycheck, or do I quit? You know, and so that's true for police as well. And I wouldn't expect too many of them quit over being asked to just check car doors to make sure they're unlocked, but. You know, they may have objected internally, or they may have told their boss, you know, this is kind of awkward. Are we sure about this?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, and again, a lot of them probably don't think about things in that way at all. You know, is this morally right? You know, some of them may, but some of them probably don't.
I'd be uncomfortable with it if I was a police officer. I'm like, so we're just going to be, you know, going on people's, I don't know if they're actually going into driveways,
I think they were. Yep.
Which is, you know, and you might be saying, hey, I don't think this is a good policy.
Yep.
They might voice that concern internally, but may not quit over it.
But I think what's also creepy about it is even if, you know, you overstep that line, you know, a normal citizen would be held responsible.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's no way the police would be.
Well, the police are the ones that hold people responsible. So it's like, if there's a problem, if there's a serious problem, you call the police. Well, who do you call if the police are the problem? Then I mean, then you call your lawmaker, you know, and you complain. That's really the only option you have at that point.
But what can you do in the heat of the moment, you know?
Wow, Kyle, that was kind of like a hard hit against statism right there, dude.
I mean, I'm not saying there has to be some top level where, you know, that's the final level, and what is your
godfather of the state?
You know, if you're an angry citizen, you can call the police department and complain, get their badge number, complain to their bosses, make a stink on social media, and you know, ultimately call your representative and say, you know, we don't like this policy. Get these people off our lawns and stop checking car doors. So, but
one thing I thought of is what happens if they continue engaging in this, and somebody wakes up in the middle of the night, sees somebody outside of their house, comes outside with a gun. You know what I mean? Like, what happens when that happens?
That's the no-knock raid, yeah, man.
Yep. You know, if somebody fires at the police, say they kill a police officer, they're going to get
and now
crucified.
It's a hate crime.
Yeah.
it'd be a huge problem.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, but yeah, like, so it just seems like police officers in our society aren't held to the same moral, accountability as everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, like like Arvin Vora was talking about, like, if you had a friend who was a mechanic, right, and his boss was telling him to tell people that they've got shit wrong with their car that isn't wrong with their car, thus charging them like unnecessary parts and labor. That's a pretty dishonest thing, and you'd probably be like, "What the fuck, dude? Why would you do that?
Right.
It's pretty fucked up." So why aren't police officers held to the same accountability? And really doing more fucked up things than that even.
Well, I mean, I personally kind of think it could be partly economic incentive like that, to where as a private business they have a big economic incentive, hopefully, to not do that to their customers, and you know what I mean. But
Generally,
like,
yeah,
with the government, those economic incentives aren't there.
Yeah. I mean, they can do a bad job like again and again and again and again, and they never go out of business.
They don't go out of business, but you can't say that nobody's trying to hold them to a higher standard, because there's protests in the streets, there's riots. People are upset about police brutality. Black Lives Matter was founded. So there's been all kinds of backlash against, immoral police activity, police brutality, going back to the LA riots,
Mm-hmm.
So you really can't say that there's been no reaction at all to abusive police.
well, you can't say there's never been modest reforms that were made over time, and I'm sure folks other than us who historically have had it much more difficult would probably acknowledge that it's not the 1960s, it's not even the 1980s anymore. So it's not that there isn't that popular pressure for reform, hopefully towards civil liberties, but the fact that this power structure is in place that has fundamentally different incentives than pretty much everything else we have experience with in our lives is one of the things that makes me skeptical. We'll phrase it that way: skeptical of a monopolized force. So
Right, because they're kind of like, well, if enough people complain and protest and do this and that, we'll give you a little bit.
Right.
We'll give you a little bit, but we still have a monopoly on the initiation of force. So there's only so much bitching you can do.
right,
We're only going to do so much.
like
in
it has to get
return.
really bad.
Yeah.
Government is a different type of entity entirely. It's not a business. It's not a private entity. It's a governing body. So it operates completely differently. It doesn't operate on a profit and loss basis. It operates based on bureaucratic management, and it's like commands. So there's a political agenda, and then commands are passed down from the top, from the lawmakers, and from the executive. So it just is completely not comparable to the way a business operates. And the reason it's a monopoly is because if you don't have a monopoly on force in a certain area, you end up having violent clashes. So you have faction wars or civil war. So that's why a governing body has to be a monopoly.
A few of us might say that's debatable, but
Yeah, I think we could debate that.
we can hold that for another time.
I mean, if you just think about like force, and you have a bunch of competing interests all using force, whenever there's a conflict, it's going to be Kyle Wagner's agency versus Alex's agency, or versus CW's agency. So, our agents would end up fighting, and whichever of us had the most money or resources or whatever would end up winning that conflict.
So if I could, right, okay, okay, somewhat fair. So the one thing I would ask you in response to that is, okay, you know what? You're probably right. But you know what? Maybe I want to take that risk for myself. And I'm not asking you to give up Obama, or to give up Trump now, or to give up the Congress and the Supreme Court. Like, I'm not even asking that. I'm just saying, to whatever, even boil it down to geographical zone that I would have them, the claim to, a legitimate claim to say, I'm going to smoke heroin or whatever, and whatever your laws are, I reject it. And even if the rules are fine, I won't even come onto US of A property. And I guess it comes down to the option for exit and secession. So that was a long-winded question. But that concept, that notion, is what I would reply back with. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So, like, let's say you have a little tiny country, which basically your yard with your house on it, and then you wouldn't be subject to any laws on that sovereign country. So, I mean, what if you kidnap somebody in your basement or something, and we can't do anything about it because you're inviolable now, or what have you? So, it just you always end up being subject to the laws of the community or the laws of society that you live in.
So, I don't believe anyone is inviolable. And the concept of third-party self-defense is a very valid concept within the general self-defense context. So if there is someone who, I don't know, has like a few women in cages like in their basement, like, or whatever,
we have to kick the door in.
I would feel morally justified taking the firearm I own
Absolutely.
and trying to end that situation, regardless of what legal background, I guess, of it. So,
well, that's vigilante justice, and then you run into all kinds of problems with people taking the law into their own hands, and that's where you have things like in at some African countries, they do the necklacing where they put a tire filled with gasoline on people and they light them on fire to kill them. I mean, it's so brutal. So it's very arbitrary, and that's why we prefer a court system where the accused gets a chance to tell their side of the story, get a lawyer. There's a judge, there's a jury. It's a legal process. It's not just some angry guy grabbing his gun and going and blowing somebody away because he heard a rumor that the guy committed some crime or another.
Yeah, well, I mean, so you're saying that's what would happen in like Ancapistan?
I mean, there's no such thing as Ancapistan. It's like really hard to imagine a hypothetical thing that's impossible. But there's no one to say no, you can't do that, right? There are no authorities to say this isn't allowed. There has to be somebody to say, I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to, take this cruel and unusual punishment. It could be castration, it could be torture. People do all kinds of crazy stuff.
But I mean, what if you did have a small territory where there were a few competing defense agencies and they were competing with each other, and it was kind of through like an insurance type thing or whatever, and there was pre-made agreements, like they would agree on arbitrators, they would agree on courts. Like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to be utopian, but like, say there was a situation like that, you don't think something like that could work, and people pay for defense security as they need it, pay for the courts as they need it, instead of having it monopolized.
Well, we have private security now. You can hire security guards to guard your property or your mall or whatever, but they are also subject to the law. So it's not like I can hire a private force of assassins and just destroy my enemies or my competitors in the market or something like that. So the private security, they're also, like I said, also subject to rules that come from the top authority, and they say, hey, you're not allowed to do this and that.
Well, don't you think, I mean, like I said, this is a debate we could probably have for hours, but I mean, don't you think that, if you're trying to market security and defense, don't you think you want to give the customer, you want to make them feel secure. They want to know what they're getting, through a contractual agreement. Don't you think, it wouldn't be like, okay, so we're going to provide you with like murder for hire, basically. Like, don't you think there would have to be,
Well, why couldn't it be murder for hire? Like, is there someone that says you can't do murder for hire in Ancapistan?
But
because if I catch someone doing that, I'm going to gun them down.
Right.
All right, so it comes down to force. So it comes down, you're going to gun them down. Well, what if they gun you down? What if they have more force? What if they have more people?
What if they... this is extreme, but what if they take you to a concentration camp? Like, there's all these,
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to threaten violence, which is which conflicts always do come down to violence. They don't come. People say, oh, it's all about reason, but like reason, not everybody responds to reason. Conflicts come down to force. So if it ends up being your way or the other guy's way, whichever one of you has the bit greater capacity for might is going to win that conflict.
But from an economic standpoint, do you think most normal people, that if they were in this situation and they wanted to hire some security, they're going to choose the guy who says, like, do you think the guy who says, like, I'll basically, like, without going through like a trusted court system, a trusted judge or arbitrator, like, you tell me this guy stole your TV, I'll go kill him for you. Do you think they're going to have a lot of clients?
Yeah, I think whoever was the biggest, strongest, and enforcement agency, or whoever did whatever they were paid to do, would probably have the most clients. Whoever wins, basically, I think. But again, even to say clients and to assume it's going to be like that, that's not what anarchy is. I mean, you have huge political factions like progressives and conservatives and nationalists and socialists. They're not going to accept a market in violence. They have their own agendas for violence. So people form these huge groups for strength, and they clash. They fight over territory. They fight over rules. You can't imagine Democrats tolerating an ANCAP society.
Absolutely not. I mean, that's why I'm big on secession.
Right.
Why do we need a one-size-fits-all? Jeff Dykes is great on that, and
in order to secede, you need a certain amount of, you need numbers for one thing to make it work, and you have to be able to defend your area. And this kind of leads into our borders discussion. But in order to form your own country, you need enough people to make that work. You're going to need a national defense. You're going to need a legal structure.
Well, as far as needing numbers, wasn't it something like a third of Americans were for the American Revolution in 1776?
I don't know if it was a third, but there was at the very least a significant minority who opposed it. Like more than 40% opposed.
But it was a tireless minority that was for it.
Yeah, I think the leadership, the 3%, the politicians, the leadership was for it. Right? I mean, the founding fathers were all political leaders of the
founding
colonies.
Fathers, dude. That sounds kind of cultish, dude. I think so. I think that term sounds a little cultish, dude. But here's the thing, Kyle. Like, you'd probably argue that you wouldn't want the government to do a bunch, like, manufacture food or manufacture cars or manufacture guns or manufacture musical instruments or manufacture like record labels. You'd probably argue against the government doing like all those things, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you wouldn't trust the government with the unimportant things because they'll fuck them up, why would you want to grant them a monopoly on the really important things?
It's not a matter of importance. It's a matter of what it's suited to do and what it's not suited to do. And an analogy that Mises used was gasoline. He said, like, gasoline is good for powering cars, but it's not recommended for drinking. So government is kind of like that. It's good at force and violence because it's a communal entity, and it's very, very powerful and strong. But it's not good at the little things like building cars and serving consumers. It's a governing body. It's just a completely different kind of thing. It makes laws, but like I as a private citizen can't make laws that apply to you guys, but a lawmaker can. So he's in a different position. It's a division of labor, and it's just a different role in society.
But there's so many laws too, dude. Maybe they're a little too good at it, dude, because there's a lot of fucking laws.
There are a lot of laws, and I mean, I'm a laissez-faire capitalist, so I definitely take more of a hands-off approach, light regulation, but I just think it's a big mistake to think we can abolish the entire legal structure altogether and somehow society's still going to be able to function with no, like, what are the laws of Ancapistan? Who makes the laws of Ancapistan if there are no lawmakers? It's a question without an answer.
Well, no, I think there is an answer, and it's funny because you guys were talking about like economics and economic incentives a little while ago. There's a pretty good book out there called The Not So Wild Wild West, and there's even a condensed pamphlet version that I thought was just a delight to read, and I would highly recommend it. So one of the things they talked about was dispute resolution in these places where there was not an established legal structure. And it went over all the sort of common disputes, like property line disputes, things like that. And they went over a few of the really creative solutions that the folks came up with that worked. So just one, for as a short example, there's a common practice for when there's a dispute between two folks. The two folks would each appoint a judge, for lack of a better word. So the two, and then those two judges, just those two, would have to agree on a third. So that way there was three, and then both cases would be heard, and whatever the majority of the judges voted on, that was where it went. And then anyone who agreed to this as a dispute resolution and then redacted on the judgment, they generally face some shunning or some economic pain as a result. So no, that's just one example. I won't
What if both parties don't agree? Like, what if one of the parties in the conflict is like a posse or like a gang, a violent gang, and they're not going to third-party arbitration? You know, they're just out to rob and loot. You know, somebody has to crack down on them with greater force than they have.
Chances are they would probably just build a government.
That's what happens. I mean, you look at the Wild West, I mean, it was probably, you know, fairly unsettled, but as towns were established, as the land was all claimed, you know, you have a need for rules and structure and courts and prisons and all of that stuff. So, and you know, a lot of times voluntarists will say, oh, everything should be voluntary, but it's like, okay, you want to voluntarily pay for security and for courts and what have you, but whoever they're using violence against, it's not voluntary to them. The criminals, they don't want to go to jail. It's involuntary. You know, we're coercing them.
Yeah, but that's no different now. I mean, if
right. Well, I support that.
What if someone doesn't approve of those state laws and they come after you? Like,
yeah,
that's going to happen either way.
That's how order works. You know, I mean, it's like it's not. It shouldn't be. It's not going to be voluntary to the murderer to get arrested. He doesn't want to get arrested. He doesn't want to go to jail. We just don't care. We do it anyway.
Right. But I mean, why is that even an issue, though? I mean, it shouldn't be an issue if, you know what I mean, if somebody committed a murder, like, it doesn't matter whether they want to go to jail or not. They violated somebody's property rights, so
that's where you guys become coercionists, which is fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you call yourself voluntarists, but there's exceptions to that. You have exceptions to that rule.
The exception is when somebody is initiated the
force is legitimized.
And then you're
self-defense is cool, Kyle.
All right. I mean, self-defense itself is actually very weak because, you know, if I come at you with 10 men or 30 men or 300 men, you know, it's a numbers game. So it comes down to who has the more numbers.
So, like, so you're saying, like, we need cops inevitably?
Yeah, I think that the structure of, you know, lawmakers and then police to enforce those laws and that being a communal function, I do think, I mean, I'm going to say it's inevitable, but it's a conscientious design. It's a man-made design. I mean, it's not a natural thing. Like, we're actually, society is like, we want this. You know what I mean? It's from... Like, government, a lot of people don't know where political power comes from, but it comes from, like, the will of the people or the will of the majority. Obviously, there's a minority that's not happy with the situation, but, like, the people form governments, they form these institutions because they want that control. They want the social order.
Did you ever see that movie, Cuffs, with Christian Slater?
I missed it.
Well, like, I think if there's, like, 3 Christian Slater movies to see... There'd be like Gleaming the Cube, and it was also called A Brother's Justice. Mm-hmm. And then number 2 would be Pump Up the Volume. And number 3 would probably be Cuffs. But anyways, here's why this is relevant. Like, in that movie, there was like I believe it took place in an area of San Francisco, I believe. And apparently, in that area, there was like private like police stations, kinda. And they were like people basically like subscribed to their protection, so they had to do a good job of, you know, like fighting off robbers and keeping the neighborhood safe.
Yeah, the robbers don't subscribe. I mean,
well,
just make sure you're clear on that. I mean, it's like, okay, I voluntarily pay for force, or I voluntarily pay, but the people being arrested, it's not voluntary to them. Just pointing that out.
But they violated property rights.
Well, who makes
they're
that
subjects,
right?
You know,
dude,
but
now you say you couldn't do police better, and you could do it. You could do it like you would do like fucking. How do you do cable television, and everybody has that for like $30 a month or whatever. You know, who's to say like markets couldn't figure that out?
Well, now you have conflicts over who decides what these enforcement agencies actually do. You guys make the presumption that they're going to enforce property rights and follow ANCAP law. I mean, if I'm a progressive, I don't want that. I want to take money from the wealthy and redistribute it to the poor. You know, so yeah, I have a different agenda that I'd be willing to pay for. Again, even assuming it's a market with property rights, which it's not.
But isn't it a presumption to say, oh, well, with the state, this will be fixed, and therefore we're not going to allow you to leave? Like, to me, that seems like a much bigger presumption than...
Should we present you with a list of bad states? Like haven't states created the most killing like since the history of man?
Yeah, but you have to understand, like it's a type of organization, like a committee or a council. I mean, it's just very easy for people to come together and organize a new government, incorporate as a new government. So you're declaring war on a form of organization. It's as pointless as declaring war on the form of on terror, right. Because it's like it's an abstract idea. All somebody has to do is organize a new government, and the war on the state is back on. You know what I mean? Like it's just super easy to organize. So the war on terror, it's like somebody commits another terrorist act and it's like, oh, war's back on. It's an unwinnable war. So the war on statism is also unwinnable because anybody could always just form a new government. You know?
So the war on statism is it's you think it's like it's just bullshit?
Yeah, it's unwinnable because, you can't stop people from mentally like just wanting government, organizing a new government. Like, you can't crawl on their heads and turn a switch, and all of a sudden they don't want a government,
Well, yeah, I mean, you also can't really make government reduce itself, can you? I mean,
that's my question. That's what turned me from a minarchist into an anarchist. How do you?
So this is
what's
how
the
you,
mechanism?
It's an organization of people. So the way you make it, you're thinking of it almost as like a independent entity or some sort of a creature. And in order to reduce it, you have to take control of it. You have to win elections. You have to get limited government people in there. Like Ron Paul is my favorite example. But you need, like, let's say Congress was made up of, let's say there were 300 Ron Pauls in Congress. That's going to reshape the policies and laws of America because you have that many constitutionalists in there voting. They would have control, and it would actually change. So you change it by taking control of the top level and changing all those policies. That's how you end the Fed. That's how you end the income tax. That's how you actually achieve our goals, is just winning elections. Well, it's extremely hard, but I mean,
like, but when does a government ever shrink? Like, has it ever happened? Like,
yeah, many times.
Is it in their interest, though?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to use everybody's favorite historical example of a bad government, but there have been some very totalitarian governments that broke up. That there was secessions. They just couldn't sustain. Like, okay, I'll use communist. Russia, Soviet Union, certainly went from more totalitarian as the Soviet Union to a little bit more liberal. I'll use liberal in the classical sense. They have a market economy, certainly still not really what we would consider a free country or laissez-faire capitalist, but it's better, So I think Chile, during Pinochet's era, probably arguably went more free market. It's possible for people.
But didn't Pinochet actually kill like 30 people to get into power? And the CIA backed that, by the way. The CIA backed that coup,
dude. I didn't mean to open that whole can of worms.
To overthrow a democratically elected leader.
I give you another example. Like Cuba, I think I was reading, used to have 99 or 100% public employment, and now it's down to like 70%, and they actually have people like working in trades and working in, like, I guess, small businesses. I don't know, but I mean, it's possible to move that needle toward, more free enterprise. Like, if we were to, like, if the three of us were all elected to, like, the Baltimore County Council, we would be able to, like,
4 people here, dude.
4 people. There's 7 on the council. If the 4 of us were on there, we could cut taxes significantly. We could cut spending significantly, and we could actually remake it. Now, we'd never get elected because all 4 of us are too radical, but
that's what I'm saying about, you said if there was 300 Ron Pauls in Congress, like how do you even, and then at that point, how do you get rid of the people, like the deep state, military industrial complex, banking and stuff like that? That's where the real problems are. Well, yeah, how do you get rid of that?
They're all
I feel like those people would never let 300 Ron Pauls join Congress. Ron Paul is like a fucking glitch in the Matrix, and that, like, who else like that gets into the state?
Well, here's the thing. It comes down to what the popular opinion. If Americans were so swayed toward limited government that they were to even elect 300 Ron Pauls, the public support would be there to roll back that military spending and to roll back the welfare state. If we were to have that kind of success, it would mean that the people were behind it. So they're currently not behind it. The people currently, they reelect the incumbents. They like Democrats. They like Hillary. They like Romney. That's just what the American public
I think
is.
things are changing. This past election, it shows that some people, are waking up to libertarian ideas and things like that. But at what point do you get there? And
it's hard. I mean, it's hard. And I talk to anarchists who are already liberty minded and try to pull them toward minarchy and say, look, this is the path forward for us. Is we actually have to grow our numbers. Our party, if you want to do the LP, our party has to grow bigger, and we have to actually win some elections. Like that's the process. You have to play the game. I know nobody wants to play the game. They want to, flip over the chessboard and walk away and say screw this. But that's not going to do anything, because the Democrats and the Republicans are just going to keep winning. They're going to stay in those seats of power, and they make the laws, they control things, and that's where we're at right now.
Right. I mean, I completely agree with you. Less would be much better than what we have now.
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
saying a minarchist society would be like, no, it's got to be anarchism. I mean, for me, that's a moral position. So obviously shrinking the state as much as possible. It's not something you can't just rip the Band-Aid off and expect it all go away overnight. It doesn't work that way. You have to change people's minds. You have to.
That's an argument. Is minarchism a stepping stone to Ancapistan, whereas I would put minarchism as the ideal. I don't think it's immoral to have a government that protects life and property from violent assaults, and violent and fraudulent assaults. To me, that's moral. That's a moral position.
What would you how would you fund the state? Because I've heard multiple things about, well, you could do a lottery, you could do, but I mean, you obviously have a position on income tax.
Yeah, I mean,
you could do like State Scout cookies.
I'd like taxes to be minimized, but I just think that the government is a communal body, and that just like my homeowners association has dues where all the houses chip in and it helps pay for common areas and common functions, that you're going to have some taxes. Now, if I want taxes to be 5% of what they are today, I mean, that would be a huge relief on all of us, and that would be a great improvement. But, the ANCAP position is a hard line. Taxation is theft, no taxation allowed. But then you start to ask the question, well, how are you going to pay for all these public services that we want? And obviously they don't want them to even be public. They want everything to be private. It starts getting really radical, and you're going, okay, well, you're going to have roads, and you're going to put tolls everywhere. Then you get into privatization of roads, privatization of the military, privatization of police, whereas my idea is much simpler. Let's just cut taxes and cut spending, and shrink the government. But I think there are going to be some small amount of taxes to fund the state apparatus.
Respectfully disagree.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't think there's any really such thing these days as a small amount of taxes.
Well, there could be. I mean, let's say we got rid of the income tax, which is progressive tax. You could do a head tax, which is just a flat amount per person, which is how dues in a homeowners association works. Every house I pay like $500 a year. So something like that, but it could be much less than what we're paying now. That would definitely be an improvement.
Dude, what's Kyle Wagner's position on the universal basic income?
I oppose it because it destroys incentives. The incentive is for people to not work because they're getting paid to not work. They don't need to work anymore, I guess. And then it also their incentive would be to increase it. They're going to be like, hey, I'm already getting X amount of dollars, $10,000 a year. I want to make it 15. I want to make it 20. They're going to vote for that. And, you're taking money away from producers and giving it to non-producers. So, that discourages production and encourages non-production.
Well, they have this idea that in the event that would happen, the people who are living on universal basic income are going to just like, they're going to make art and use their creativity and do what they want and find their passions and everything. No, most people that are going to receive a universal basic income are going to just get by and do what makes them feel good, which is probably sitting on their ass and doing a whole lot of nothing and not doing anything super productive.
Yeah, like I've heard it explained like they could give out like $13,000 per person or something every year, and then if they cut back like so many other sectors of government, because just giving the money directly over to the people and not letting a bunch of that money go to waste in a bureaucratic black hole, by eliminating all those jobs, it would actually might work out better. And then with like automation coming, with automation coming, do you think that universal basic income is like an inevitable topic?
It's definitely a topic because the left is all about it. They're excited about it and they're pushing it, particularly the Green Party. And they're kind of on the forefront. So that stuff starts with the radical side, and then it kind of trickles into the Democratic Party, and then they start talking about it. But I think it would be a massive expansion of the welfare state because you'd be giving money to people that don't need it. There's no means testing. If it's universal, it's just a handout. So you're giving it to rich families. You're giving it to people that just have no need of it. And also, where's that money coming from? I mean, all you're doing is taking from one bucket and putting it in another bucket. You're just redistributing wealth. You're not creating wealth.
Do you think it's going to happen?
I don't know. I think we're in deep trouble as far as our public debt goes. I think that the Fed is keeping this thing going by buying up treasury bonds and keeping our financial system afloat. And I think, we should have been cutting spending a long time ago and getting the ship right. But since we're obviously not going to be doing that, I don't think Trump's going to do that. I think that there's going to be a day of reckoning, or they're going to be, if not a single day, maybe a slow, long decline over the rest of our lives in and out of recessions and weak economic growth.
They're going to run down as long as they can,
Yeah, I mean, you'll see the dollar go down over time. I don't want to make a prediction like that's definitely going to be the case, because when you have a deflationary spiral and credit is collapsing, the value of a dollar can go up. So just don't put me on record as an inflationist. Even though they're printing money, value of money can still go down. I know that, or go up. I know that's counterintuitive, but that's how value works.
Word. So, but I mean, like, don't you think it would be kind of like, don't you think they're probably going to let this happen? Like, as far as like the state, like it would be a big expansion for government. It would be a government victory, really.
When you say let this happen, like, they don't have as much control as we like to think they have. I don't think they intended on the 2008 collapse. I think that they thought the economy was strong beforehand. I don't think any of them saw it coming. Like, they study in the intellectual sphere, the academic sphere, they study Keynesian economics, and that's what they know. And that's what the academics believe. That's what all these theorists believe, and the people at the Fed believe. Like, they're not like puppet masters manipulating it. Like, they actually believe in this stuff. It's how they were taught. It's how they were trained. They believe in deficit financing and fiscal stimulus and quantitative easing. Like, they really think that the economy's like a car, and all the Fed has to do is just step on the gas, and we can goose economic growth just basically by creating money and debt, money and credit out of nothing. Like, they think that that's, going to boost an economy.
They just don't pay attention to history,
Yeah.
Seeing this, the other countries that have just went down these horrible inflationary paths, and what happens, people are carrying around book bags full of cash to buy nothing. You can't. It's just it's inevitable. People think, that it could never happen here.
Yeah.
But.
Well, if it does happen, I think, we need to be there saying, hey, we told you this was going to happen. We told you you couldn't spend more than you have. You can't live outside of your means. And as a society, we're just going to have to deal with it. But, we need to be leaders, and we need to be there saying this, you can't do this. You can't run these huge deficits, these $1 trillion deficits every year. You can't fund all these wars. And like Ron Paul says, he's like, it's going to come to an end. Either we run out of money or there's an ideological shift before that. But I think you always have to focus on that ideological shift, and you always have to be that alternative saying, okay, yeah, we've been a voice in the wind for a long time. We've been telling you we can't afford all these wars. We can't afford this welfare state. We need to be responsible. And then maybe when it hits the fan, people listen to us. You hope.
That's what I think it's going to take. It's going to take a catastrophe.
Yeah. Well, then the socialists are going to be there going, we told you capitalism was broken.
Oh, yeah.
We told you free markets didn't work, and this is why we need government to control literally everything.
But you know what we can afford?
What's that?
Is a wall if we put solar panels on it.
A wall? How does the solar panels fund the wall? How's that?
Next question.
Yeah.
So, So, did any of you guys watch the Chase Rachel's Larkin Rose Borders debate this week?
I have not watched it yet.
Yeah, I did.
I really want to, though.
Yeah. How about you, Kyle?
We talked about it. I didn't watch it. I was blocked by Chase and Larkin.
Blocked by
Man,
Chase too.
you're like a legend.
You were blocked?
Yeah.
Just 2 days ago or 3 days ago. Yeah.
By Chase?
Yeah, we were friends for a little bit. Yeah. I met him and his wife and his son in Asheville when my wife and I were vacationing, and we knew we had some disagreements. So like, one of his big shticks is anti-left libertarian, and I identify as a left libertarian.
Uh-huh.
So, but we got along. Like we, anyway, got along, and yeah, after a while, I think my wife and I we just made the decision to like kind of break up, so to speak, like friendship wise. There's a lot he was saying that just really just turned us off. Anyway, but yeah, he didn't. But I think a few days ago is because of the debate. I saw it and I made a few comments, and yeah, he blocked me after that.
Wow. See, I thought he was really good before, you know, and he's kind of, I don't know, maybe some of those guys have taken, because with this extreme left-right divide,
right?
You know, you're getting dogmatic positions on both sides.
So what I really like about what folks who brandish themselves like hardcore ANCAPs is they tend to be very sympathetic to agorism. They tend to have a no reformist attitude toward minarchism.
Right.
Which in general I think is the way to go, and
Yeah.
but yeah. So there are things that I like for sure about, and I thought he was very good on.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, a spontaneous order was, I mean, I don't know if you read that.
I read parts of it. I mean, I thought he kind of regurgitated anarcho-capitalism for the most part. I don't know that he added anything beyond what Rothbard and Hoppe already.
No, it was extremely. I mean, yeah, it was.
That's
very,
a common
Hoppe.
criticism. Basically,
Right.
Kinsella and Hoppe quotes.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, well, I thought it was pretty funny because the other day, apparently, he referred to his own book as the Bible.
I heard. Yeah,
Oh, good
saw John posted something about that. I was wondering who that was, and then I figured it out.
It's wow, dude.
I hope I have that ego one day, man.
Yeah.
How amazing.
I don't know, man.
You know, when we talk about like private borders and public borders, who draws those lines in anarchism? You know, you're putting a line in the dirt and saying you guys aren't allowed to cross. I mean, what if they say no, we're crossing anyway? You know, then you have a problem. So, like, to me, I think like I think borders are established by the state, and I think private borders are basically established by the state. You know, you guys might turn to homesteading, but like I have a property deed, you know, and it's with the county, and it's the actual land borders of my property are outlined. So, and then that's a legal boundary. If somebody encroaches upon that, I can call the police and actually sue them for the encroachment.
Right, but it's a huge and I would even say not even problematic but dangerous presumption that you need this monopolized power structure to have this. I beg to differ. It's not the case, and there's plenty of examples in history. During the gold rush, again, there were intense interest in your claim because you could become rich from it, and there wasn't a state dividing out. Rothbard even talked about like on a concept of homesteading. One common law practice was like the technological details of whatever piece of land you are occupying. So in other words, a gold steader going to the river panhandling trying to find gold, it became kind of a norm through decentralized purposes of like, hey, it's like now this number I'm going to make up 50 feet by 50 feet. That's, you know, considered what is valid. You can't just say, hey, and all I see to the horizon is now my claim or whatever, because that was rejected. I was treated as unfair, and because there were disputes, absolutely, there were disputes, but
So when push came to shove, how were those disputes resolved? You know,
polycentric common law, I think, is the academic term for it. Yeah.
all right. So I don't know exactly like what party resolved that dispute. And when I say push comes to shove, I mean somebody's not neither party is willing to back down. You know, what happens?
I mean, ultimately,
It's your gold claim, and I come with a posse, and we're trying to force you off. Probably maybe we murder you or something like that. So where does the polycentric law take vengeance for you? Because you're dead, so you're not going to be able to fight back. So what happens to me and my posse?
Well, there's two scenarios with sub-scenarios within that. one is you're justified, or two, you're not. And
But who makes that determination if there's no government?
well, see, that's the thing. Like, it presumes that some of us are incapable of deciding that we require a set of people to make that determination.
Well, I think it was justified. We needed the gold, and we had the force to take it. So the violent aggressors think it's justified in their mind, and obviously you as the victim think it's not. So it comes down to who is over top of the violent aggressors to say you've done wrong here, and now you're going to be punished.
Right. We definitely don't disagree that there will be disagreements, even violent ones. I mean, those continue even right now with whatever crime, whether they have a badge or they don't. It's about deciding for people, you deciding, or a group of people deciding, we know what's best, and even if you have not violated basic libertarian ethical principles, like whether the non-aggression principle of self-ownership, things like that, even if you have not engaged in any what I would consider morally criminal activities, we're going to decide that you are now subject to our laws, determinations, and...
See, to me, that would be violating the very notion of anarchy, that you're going to subject someone to some authority or some oversight or some, anything. To me, anarchy is, I'm the king of the world and nobody can tell me what to do.
Well,
I would disagree
in a
with
romantic
that.
sense.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, it's a very anti-authority, rebellious ideology, and it's like, down with the man,
Maybe if you're talking about like anarcho-communists, or syndicalists, or
I think all anarchists have that sort of anti-authority mentality, and they think that nobody can tell them what to do. They think that they're like, I don't need to be ruled. I do what I want.
I don't think it's like that though, because I think you think about your day-to-day interactions of how many people you come in contact with. Do you think 90% of those people believe that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, that assault is wrong, that theft is wrong? I mean, I think the majority of people you meet share those sentiments that like a natural law type thing. Like
I'm inclined to agree.
You don't violate somebody's property rights. It's not right. You wouldn't want it done to you, and you understand right from wrong because wrong is something that brings harm to you. Like. You know what I mean? Like I think, and again, like if we're talking about like a Hoppian private law, private property society, I think me as an anarchist that it has to be like small units. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if you like having in the entire USA, like you're saying, you're not going to have the liberals agree, you're not going to have the Republicans agree, but I think you can have people have an anarchist society with high moral trust, with private laws, private property. Sure. On a small community-based level, or even like a county or statewide level.
But you'd have to force the statists out. I mean, if you're going to use 90%, at least 90% support public schools.
You just got to watch them.
No, I mean
until they actually do something.
Well, they do stuff. I mean, they're not afraid to use violence to achieve. Progressives aren't afraid to use violence, the violence of the state in particular, but. Even like Antifa or something, like these people are not afraid to use violence to achieve their political ends, and you have to be able to counter their violence with violence of your own.
Sure, but I think if it boils down to if you really want to secede and follow your own moral values and your principles, and there's other people that want to do it with you, and it comes down to that, you ultimately have to be willing to defend yourself, your property,
and your community or your country.
And I think you could have.
Then you're starting to form the early parts of a new country, of a new government, and you yourselves, the ANCAPs, are becoming the new dominant faction in that area. Involuntarily to the progressives that live there and the other factions that live there, they don't want to follow those rules, so you have to suppress them or force them out. Like Hoppy is a big advocate of is it Hoppa or Hoppy?
Hoppa.
Hoppa is a big advocate of physical removal, which to me, it's just these authoritarian notions And as a pro-government guy, people do say I'm authoritarian, but to call yourself an anarchist and then say we're going to make people do this, we're going to make people do that, it just seems like a contradiction.
But I mean, if it's a private covenant, like Hoppe always, espouses, who's to say that we have this private covenant and these are our rules?
Yeah.
We have an association of property owners. These are our rules, and if you want to break these rules, you're not welcome here anymore. I don't see anything wrong with that.
I just think you're going to need to be able to force out the state and the statists. So I don't see anywhere in the United States where that's feasible to do. And again, you're kind of, I just think you would be basically becoming the new government of that country.
Kyle Wagner, what is your stance on public schools?
I support private schools.
What about public schools? Do you think public schools should exist?
In a perfect world, education would be privatized. I think that public schools are, obviously less efficient and less innovative, and they're very, very popular. It's one of the strongholds of the progressive left, and actually also the progressive right. Like public schools are, they're a fortress, and you guys talk
especially in Maryland.
You guys talk about anarcho-capitalism, and it's like in the real world. Like people get really mad at me when I suggest that schools should be private.
Oh yeah.
So
they hate that.
They hate that. For myself, I hope.
Why do you hate the children?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. They're like, oh, you're against education, or they kind of try to paint you that way. And I'm just like, well, I think government is, again, going back to the gasoline analogy. It's well suited to make and enforce laws, and well suited to fight wars, hopefully defensive wars. But it's not well suited to serve consumers in the most effective way, which is education is serving the parents, which are the consumers.
Well, it's also well suited to create like a huge empire and start a whole bunch of violence.
Yeah. Well, it does that, and that's politics. We argue the position that we shouldn't engage in imperialism. That's our libertarian position, and obviously there are people that think that the U.S. Military and the U.S. government should have a presence in literally every country in the world. That's a real position. This woman that I used to work with told me that. She was a hardcore Republican, and she was like, we should have troops everywhere. I was like, okay.
Wow. Because we're America.
Yeah.
And it's our duty.
Well, they're a little bit of control freaks. They definitely want to... they want to control everywhere. They want to neutralize all threats. And that's a lot of the conservative mentality is fear-based. It's like, we don't want to let, an uprising in the Middle East. We don't want to, we have to control the South America, and we have to control every freaking country in the world. So they definitely have that mentality. And part of it is fear. They don't want to be attacked. Yep. So they become aggressive out of fear, out of defense. The defense need translates into, we got to control everybody.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. So that's kind of the conservative mind.
As if we're going to suddenly have Iranian warships,
Right.
Sailing up to our beaches and firing missiles at us.
Well, then they create their own problems because they're so aggressive to people, and then it makes people hate us, and then there's retribution, and it's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. It feeds itself because they're going, well, see, we told you, these radicals are dangerous, and you're like, well, you just killed their family in a hospital or something,
Right.
But
and then you got the military contractors.
Yeah.
That,
I think we'd be in agreement on all of this stuff. It's just ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
And with the military contractors, a lot of people blame the military-industrial complex for our foreign policy, and they're like, it's these guys driving for profit, and they're actually making the policy. But Americans really support an interventionist foreign policy. Yep. They're voting for the McCains of the world. McCain got a lot of votes with an aggressive foreign policy, and Trump actually took a less imperialistic foreign policy. He said we were going to stop doing some of that stuff, and he hasn't really followed through on that. But
it's a little bit of everything,
Well, he picked up a lot of libertarians with that because that's their issue. They were like, he's better on foreign policy than Hillary is. So,
yeah. That was one thing that I always said about Trump was he was better on foreign policy than Hillary. Mm-hmm. At least he was talking like he was. Mm-hmm. He was sounding pretty darn non-interventionist at times
because he's a nationalist.
But one could say the same about Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama.
They kind of both won in that way.
Yeah, it's a shame. But see, the thing is, like, people don't hold him to it. You know, Obama's constituency or his followers still supported him. You know, even though he definitely didn't deserve that Peace Prize, and he went on to prove that he didn't deserve it, and there was no accountability. They still love him. So, like, the people have to say, okay, you know, you were a liar. You're not getting reelected for one thing because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. We're still at war. We're still in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq. Like, we have all these problems. So, but the Democrats didn't hold him accountable because he was their man.
Because he's a Democrat, and it's
and that's on them. I mean, you have to blame those people and say, why are you supporting this guy who broke his promises?
Yeah, that's what I say. Like, every time you see the left speak out about, you know, social issues and stuff, I'm like, where were you guys? You know, where were you guys when, you know, Obama was bombing the shit out of the Middle East?
Yeah,
for all those 8 years, and you know,
are we done on the borders? Did we cover borders thoroughly enough?
Yeah, I do. I think so. So the whole Trump-Cuba thing. How do you guys feel about? Apparently, right now, Trump is trying to like undo, you know, the Obama era.
Trade policies.
Yeah, trade policies with Cuba. You know, you can actually visit Cuba right now, but apparently Trump's trying to like undo all those things.
Right. I don't see. I don't. I have to look into it more. I haven't seen, like, what is his reasoning for that? Because I mean, like, you know, the Ron Paul position is usually like, we don't have to like what those people are doing over there. We hate communism. We hate what they're doing over there. But why can't we trade with them if we want to? Why can't we have, you know, the freedom to go there if we want to? What's the issue with that?
We don't like the regime. Yeah. I mean, we just don't. It's as simple as that. We don't like the government of Cuba. And so, but there are lots of horrible governments like Saudi Arabia that we love them. We love them. Of course, we all know why that relationship is what it is because of oil. But with Cuba, I don't know. I mean, I thought Obama didn't do a whole lot that I agreed with, but that was one thing where I was like, okay, good. We should be friendly with our neighbors. You know. Even though they have a communist government, maybe they'll learn another way. But I disagreed with Trump's actions here. So, but conservatives are like seem to be happy about it. I listen to conservative talk radio sometimes, and they're like, "Screw Cuba."
Yeah, I mean, and it's fun. People like us probably hate communism more than those people do. You know what I mean? But like, why should we? You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to go get them or you know, cut off trade or, you know,
impose sanctions and all that stuff.
That's diplomacy. You know, that's something positive we can do in the world.
Yes.
And whereas right now we're doing a bunch of negative things in the world. We're killing civilians.
Try peace. Have peace where you can absolutely have it. You know, why does there need to be conflict?
Yeah, exactly.
But then again, that's their, you know, that's their MO. So.
Totally. So yeah, it sounds like everybody here is against that. That's cool. You know, one thing this week that it's like just really fucked up, the whole you know, the cop who murdered Philando Castile, he got off. So,
and we were talking about hypocritical reactions earlier, like where was the anti-war left? Where the fuck's the NRA?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this case, and I like to play devil's advocate, and I couldn't see inside the car. I couldn't see the guy's hands. I heard the cops say repeatedly, "Don't grab the gun, don't grab the gun." I'd like to know the cop's history. I'd like to know if he was a rookie, if he was green. It definitely seemed like he panicked and overreacted. Mm-hmm. I think he was not happy with what happened just based on his reaction afterwards. He seemed very distraught by the fact that he killed the guy. I don't know. Like, was the man just slow in responding and just kept reaching for his wallet and the cop got spooked? You know?
That's what I gathered.
There was testimony that came afterward that he smelled marijuana and he feared for his life.
Yeah, okay, buddy. You know, I mean,
right.
It just is very difficult. It's another one of those cases, and it's just like the Trayvon case. I hesitate to bring that up, but there's no clear video of the point of controversy, which was inside the car. You know, did the guy keep grabbing in his pocket after he's being told not to? and it just spooked the cop. I don't think the cop is cut out for field work. I think he should probably be removed from that, if not terminated entirely. He just doesn't have the temperament for it.
No, absolutely, and that's a huge issue with police nowadays. They seem to be, hiring people like that who have a propensity towards acting finicky and authoritarian type attitudes, instead of people who want to de-escalate situations. And
I think he got scared. I mean, quite frankly, I think he got scared.
Which it seems like it's happening all the time, well, of course, the left wants to make it just purely a race issue and all that, but it happens. That stuff like that happens all the time.
Like the problem is they say fear for my life, and that's like the legal jargon that makes it automatically justified. But what I always think when people are examining police situations, I would say, okay, again, third-party self-defense is completely valid. Citizens, that's one big PR thing that concealed carry holders have is, hey, we stop shootings or we stop this. So whenever there's an issue with a cop and possible overstep, what I try to do, and I think it helps shed a bit of the matrix, maybe latent prejudices that folks might have toward the authority figures, is imagine just a citizen. If they behaved that exact same way,
what would happen to them?
Like, would you be comfortable with that? At the very least, like, just comfortable.
You can't make that comparison because, all right, like,
right, because we're peasants.
I use sports analogies a lot. Like, the referee in a game has the authority to throw the flag, to call fouls. The other players don't. In a serious game, in a competitive game. And so these guys are designated law enforcement. They receive special training. They have special rules that they're supposed to follow. They have procedures they're supposed to follow. They're not just regular citizens. We treat them differently because they are different. They're police officers. They're law enforcement. So, I think in order to get this guy on...
Should the law apply equally to everyone?
Yeah, okay. So we want to apply it equally to everyone. If you want to give this guy, guilty beyond the reasonable doubt, and you want to say, okay, he was out of line, prove to me that the guy, like he said, stop reaching for the gun. The girl in the car testified that the guy was reaching for his wallet. The cop doesn't know if he's reaching for a gun or a wallet. If you're reaching for something, like he says, stop grabbing for the gun, stop grabbing for your wallet and put your hands on the steering wheel so he can see your hands.
You because I don't know what you're reaching for.
Right, but you're not a police officer. There's different rules because you're not law enforcement.
Still, you can't assume guilty until innocent. You can't. I mean, and if you choose even to engage in that job, that's you're choosing. It should be a higher standard, if anything, not a lower. Hey, I peed my pants. I'm scared because he's black and I smelled marijuana or whatever it is. Well, and frequently it is those things. Yeah. So
I can't give you a direct order. I can't say stop reaching in your pocket. Whereas as a law enforcement officer that's pulled somebody over at a traffic stop, you can say get out of the car, put your hands up. You can actually give commands. And they're authorized to give commands like that. They're authorized to pull people over. I can't put a siren on the top of my car, and if I pulled you over, with a fake siren and got out of the car and tried to make like a citizen's arrest for speeding or something, I mean, you'd give me the finger or punch me in the face and take off. Like you wouldn't do that. So we treat them differently, just like we treat referees differently in sports, because those are the people that are allowed to call the fouls.
I think it's a very weak analogy. Sports referees to the police.
It's a great analogy.
We're talking. I mean, that's
They have special uniforms.
That's something that everyone voluntarily joins into. They, accept the rules, the referees, and you know what? If they don't, they can choose to not play.
Yeah, right. We don't make the laws, and that to me that's a huge issue where a lot of these things come from. Is why does the state have the right to stop and detain people like that if they haven't committed any act of aggression against anybody? You understand, people say, well, you got to have it's public safety, somebody's got a tail light out, this and that.
Yeah, you're driving on public roads, so that's the rules of the road, and they're allowed to pull you over if you exceed the speed limits, or if your vehicle doesn't conform, if it's at the light out or whatever. they're allowed to pull people over.
But I mean,
you're on public property,
you know,
so you have to respect the rules of that property.
You know as well as I do, though, a lot of that stuff is, I mean, it's purely revenue based. It's not, you know what I mean? You tell me my tail light's out, or I failed to use a turn signal or something. Is that, and then you write me a ticket? Is that ticket gonna like?
I think it's safety based because they get paid either way. They're not profit oriented. Like, that cop doesn't make more money because he wrote you a ticket. He gets paid the same salary either way. So he's just doing his job. Again, it's a bureaucratic system. Command.
Yeah, but don't they also have like ticket quotas though?
I don't know the internal process, but they may.
Yeah,
they may.
I've heard about that.
It's probably not. That might not be that way everywhere, but there might be police departments that do have stuff like that.
Maybe to encourage them to do their job and find speeders, instead of sitting at Dunkin' Donuts
or find revenue.
I don't know how much that matters, just because all those guys get paid either way through the tax system. They're not necessarily making more money just because they wrote more tickets.
Right, but they're just thinking in their heads, I'm just doing my job. This is just what I have to do. I don't make the laws, I just enforce them. Right. And, I mean, but again,
do they care about the profitability of the police department? I don't think they do.
They probably don't.
They get budgeted the same amount of money.
I mean, that's where they get paid. That's their job.
Yeah, but it's not a business. They get paid through the budget process.
I think they just do it because they say, I don't make the laws, I just enforce them, and I have to do my job. I think that's why they do,
But there's also colloquialism that's used regarding the police, like the band of silence. Like, you don't talk ill about that's a big part of the culture. A lot of police cultures, you don't talk ill about another police officer because you're all on the, to phrase it gently, you're all on the same team. You're all looking out for each other. So
they feel like they can't speak out. Maybe
right.
If there are libertarian-leaning police officers,
right, exactly.
they know. They're probably saying to themselves again. We were talking about earlier. If I speak out about this, or if I stop like detaining people for stupid reasons and harassing people and all, I'm probably going to lose my job. So then they have to make that,
or just not get a promotion because you're not getting quotas. And they have to make not meeting your metrics.
They have to make that moral decision. Should I keep doing this, or should I just keep violating people's rights?
Right. They certainly have a team mentality. But that's true of a lot of different groups. Like, you work together. You don't want to disparage your partners and your friends and colleagues. So you don't want to make them look bad. You don't want to make your private company look bad in the public eye. So
sure.
Yeah. So, Kyle, you wanted to talk about anti-degeneracy libertarians.
Yeah. So this is a really controversial topic. Degeneracy, I look at as a kind of behavior. And I'm not an anti-degeneracy libertarian. I wouldn't say. I'm slightly conservative a little bit, but I'm pretty loose for the most part. But they get upset about all the transgender stuff. They get upset about open borders. In my opinion, they're I would call them social conservatives. Sometimes even premarital sex, all that stuff. And they're there's a lot of them, and it's a right pulling social conservative side of our party and of our movement. And I know you guys have seen, and it's not just minarchists, it's ANCAPs as well. In fact, it's a lot of ANCAPs, and you're going, but this is really strange. But these guys are actually pretty hardcore about this stuff. And one thing, I saw a video of a girl, it was Inked magazine, I think, on Facebook, and she was walking around, she was wearing a thong and a little tiny top, and her ass was tattooed with snakes or something like that, and she was twerking on things in public. She was going in the subway and dancing on the subway pole like it was a stripper pole in front of all the subway riders and everything, and she's doing lap dances on park benches and stuff like that. Just really kind of flaunting it, and I think that would be kind of a public indecency or a lewd behavior kind of issue. But that would be something where they would look at they would say that's degenerate behavior. And then we've had all these gay pride parades, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them don't like that either, homosexuality. So I don't know what to really say about it other than I see it online. I see a lot of these guys leaning that direction. The ANCAP side tends to like HAPA. And I know he's taken some, as we were talking about earlier, some more authoritarian stances on Democrats and communists, physically removing them. There's a little bit of an embrace of the helicopter rides. They make jokes about throwing people out of helicopters all the time. So they have a hardness to them. They mean, they're joking, but it's kind of like it's not. It's a little bit of a threat behind it, I think. So, what do you guys think?
Well, based on the description, I would have to identify as a degenerate libertarian.
Yeah, you said you were left leaning, and that would tend to be. These guys would definitely tend to reject that.
Honestly, it doesn't even have. I mean, with the borders thing, national borders are not valid. I would say, and I think is correct. But even beyond that, so I went to Pride because I actually identify as bisexual, and folks who make a prejudice based off of the plumbing of someone who I might happen to love, that's just a form of bigotry in my mind, and I don't think it's compatible with a ethically individualistic political philosophy. But no, I think that's just barking up the wrong tree. I mean, there are issues, and I think people look for reasons, whether, it's the kids these days or how they're acting, or now there's this trans people when 30 years ago it was homosexuality, and then 20 years before that it was interracial marriage, like whatever it happens to be. Like, I actually originally discovered libertarianism through Ayn Rand, and there's a lot I like about her and Nathaniel Branden, his psychology of being productive. So not in the sense of being a libertine smoking dope until you don't do anything or whatever. Like, that's not the life that I want, and that's what I would even argue for. But you're right, I have seen a few of these folks, not a lot, but I've seen a few of these folks talk, and I just think they're barking up the wrong tree. Like, so.
Well, I mean, I don't think my view on it is, if you do whatever you want, as long as you're not violating anybody else's property rights, if you have whatever lifestyle you want,
right.
Seek your own values, your own goals. And I think when it comes to them talking about not liking degeneracy, okay, well, don't allow it on your private property. If you want to have a Hoppian type covenant, and you don't want to allow it there, that's perfectly fine. But,
and I would have to respect that.
Yeah. And what gets me though about the left, obviously, though, and I think we'll all probably agree on this, and Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, and he's so good on it, is that when subjective things like transgenderism and hurt feelings and bigotry and stuff, when you try to legislate those things like they're doing in Canada right now, you that's so open to interpretation and
problematic.
When you're trying to compel the language people use, the thoughts they use, and everything, it just opens up this can of worms as to where, okay, well, it's so subjective, and they can so easily identify you as a criminal if you hurt somebody's feelings or say the wrong thing. If you're an employer, you don't have the right to freedom of association, freedom of discrimination anymore. I'm not saying bigotry is a good thing, or you should actively, seek out to hurt or harm or hate people. But if you're not physically harming them or their property, I'm sorry, hurting somebody's feelings isn't a crime.
Right.
Like, I think I saw yesterday, I'm not sure if this was like a real article, I was just scrolling through Facebook, and is it like somewhere in Canada they're talking about like fining people if they use the wrong gender pronoun?
Yeah, apparently that's a thing. Again, Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. Yeah, I mean, they want to, they want to start criminalizing that.
I think that is not the way to go at all. Yeah. I think that would be... Yeah, I think it's a piss poor way.
It's compelling the use of language, which is the opposite of free speech and free ideas and exchange of, people have to be able to talk about these things, and when you just start locking people in cages for having different opinions, whether they're hateful or not, you're not going to get anywhere.
I'm sure go ahead.
Personally, like, I like to get away from talking about like the whole like fucking left right paradigm, blah blah blah. I think it's like. And I really don't like that extending into libertarianism, really. But at the same time, I think it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I saw like an article where it said, if you're a straight male and if you won't make out with your
gay friend
without a man who identifies as female, you're transphobic.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's so insane.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, and it's like I really hate going the right left thing, but I think that's like stuff like that is just like ridiculous coming from the left right now.
Right.
Yeah, they've gone overboard with a lot of this stuff, I think.
Yeah. They've gone balls out.
Yeah. Sexuality is one of the things where it's so complicated that I don't like when anyone I don't like the moral crusade and what like what you should do. That
you are not allowed to say this.
Spidey sense, like it's like a red flag for me.
Right.
So,
Triggers you.
Yeah. Right. There you go.
Yeah. I don't know. It's cultural conservatism on one side where they're like, okay, one man, one woman, family unit, and then the other side has gone really far to the just throw it all to the wind, and they're actually aggressive about it to the point where if you don't embrace all of these alternative lifestyles, then you're almost a criminal. They would probably, the left I would think would criminalize homophobia. They would criminalize racism. If you took a poll of them, I can almost guarantee you they would say, yeah, there should definitely be laws for holding those opinions.
Man, I mean, but I don't think that's really all the left.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
it's though you don't like the left, right? But I mean, there's factions within these factions
that are violent, and
almost everybody is violent except for pacifists. Like everybody kind of wants something enforced, but like one of our values or one of my values as a classical liberal is tolerance. So we try to.
Well, I mean, dude, I think it's very important to state that as like libertarians or voluntarist, that we are against the initiation of force.
Sure.
You don't have to like it, but don't initiate force.
Yeah, the initiation of force. Yep. So, and that's pretty anti-violent.
Yeah.
I think so.
But you still support violence in defense.
Sure.
But it's legitimate.
Yes.
Right. Well, so when it's something you want, you are okay with violence.
So something
when
we
it's
want
something
is
that's
not
inherently a natural right.
All right. So if it conforms with the natural rights, then violence is acceptable.
In retaliation.
Or in defense.
Yeah,
but it still comes down to force. I'm just saying.
Sure.
Like,
I don't think
unless you're a total pacifist and you're just gonna like turn the other cheek.
It does, but I mean, it's irrelevant. It's against the initiation of force.
I'm not like, I don't like to use that phrasing because I'm like, if somebody comes on my property, to me that's not an initiation, but me forcing them to leave is an initiation. Because they're where they're not supposed to be. But you would call them being there and trespassing the actual initiation.
Well, I think it's pretty common sense that if somebody comes on your property, unless you have like visible no trespassing signs, you probably shouldn't start shooting until after you tell them to leave, or
they refuse to leave.
Until after you know that they're a definite threat.
They're an unwanted. Oh, well, let's say an unwanted guest. They just refuse to leave. Would you use force? Would you then, I would say, initiate force, but you would call, like, where's the force actually being initiated there?
I mean, I think, like, there definitely comes a point, man, if somebody's on your property and you tell them to leave and they keep coming for you, there comes a point where, you might fear for your life.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, let's say they set up a tent in your yard and they just won't move.
I would...
Would you initiate force?
Physically remove them.
You would initiate force.
I mean, if they set up a tent on your property and that's an aggression, and you've asked them to leave.
Are you calling it an aggression?
You've made it clear they're not invited. You don't want them there. You've asked them to leave, and they still. What
if they say it's their property and you're aggressing on them? Just by
Well, I mean,
both of you say the other is the aggressor because you both claim the same land.
I mean, but
they homesteaded it. They built a tent.
No, that's and well, who's to say you couldn't have some sort of a deed or a property title?
Yeah, well, that's where government comes in, because that's your land, that's not your land, and they resolve it that way. Anyway, back to degeneracy. I did want to talk about
right.
public property. That's where a lot of this stuff comes into question, because public property is managed by government. It sets the rules. It does the topless laws like we just had at Ocean City and things like that. So, if you have autonomy to practice degeneracy or nudity on your own private property, what are the rules when you're on public streets, in public squares, in public parks? That's where you have a lot of the controversy, because public property is sort of, people have different opinions on what those rules should be. A social conservative would say that girl walking around in a thong is completely unacceptable, probably.
Sure. Yeah, but they'd be wrong. We all agree on that.
I'm not sure. So let's say I'm on the subway and I have a child with me or something like that, and this girl is twerking upside down on the hand pole. Who makes the rules for the subway? Well, the subway operator.
Sure.
They should be able to say you're not you can't do that here or something. It just gets really complicated with public property.
It does. It creates the tragedy of the commons, and you're going to have conflicts because of public property.
I just
inevitably
think you say that, but I just think that there's going to be some public property, some shared areas where it's either woods or roads. I know that triggers a lot of ANCAPs, but I just don't see how you have privatized everything. I just don't see how that works when you have a community and some areas are just shared by everybody. Maybe it's a lake with a bunch of houses around it, and everybody kind of uses the lake.
No, exactly. It's you're absolutely right. There would always be some sort of common property. But one thing I don't want you to make a mistake that's fairly common is to conflate the state non-state dichotomy with the private and communal. I mean, just as we would acknowledge that a voluntary commune is perfectly legitimate, that there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But even as you mentioned the debate, one thing Larkin said is look, common thoroughfares that's kind of standard that's existed in every single society. That's not going away, and frankly, that's the way it should be. So, yeah, there's always going to be unknown spaces. There's always going to be common public thoroughfares.
Shared.
There's always going to be easements. There's always
But then you get into the question of who makes the rules. Again, if you have a village surrounding a lake and they all share the lake, and one guy's trying to overfish the lake or what have you, there ends up being a political body, some sort of association that says that makes the rules and manages that property. So it turns into a political issue because it's shared property, and that leads to conflicts over what's allowed and what's not allowed. You end up with a political body.
Okay. If you can raise claim that someone is detracting from your ability to use whatever common resource as an asset, if someone is either due to pollution or whatever it is, you can raise that, and and if you're justified, then I hope there's
pollution's a great example too.
Yeah.
Can I just pump smog into the atmosphere that everyone is breathing in, and government regulates that and says that you can't do that? And to me personally, that's reasonable. I think you can go too far with that and actually restrict all economic activity, all mining, all farming.
Right.
We would all starve to death if we couldn't shape the environment and harvest natural resources.
There's
So there's a balance.
There's an article by Roderick Long called A Plea for Public Property, and a lot of what he talked about was not only the necessity for a lot of these type of things, but also from an anarchist standpoint, how it would still be dispute resolution, so so I'd recommend that, because a lot of, and especially even ANCAPs, they think, as soon as everything's not individuated fee simple relationships with everyone else, yes, there has to be some sort of structure, and therefore that is a government, which I don't think that's always the case.
I really don't think anarchy is anything like what ANCAPs think it is, or what they say it is, or what they would want it to be. I don't think they would have any say, any power, or anything. I just think anarchy is just people fighting with each other.
How do you know?
Okay.
Well, that I disagree.
Dude, you got off here though, because we were supposed to be talking about
degeneracy.
Anti-degeneracy, dude.
Yeah.
And then you shifted the conversation.
It always happens.
You shifted the conversation to freedom versus statism again, and you're arguing in favor of statism.
No, I think it was who decides what's
we were trying. Yeah, who decides what behavior is allowed on public property? You know, the pride parades and that kind of thing.
But couldn't you have, you know what I mean? Couldn't you have like, you know, you have like a country club type thing, like you're talking about the lake setting? Like, what if somebody owned that property, or it was a joint like shareholders? You know, people own that property.
HOA,
they made like an HOA type thing. They made the decisions. This is the rules on this property, and you know, I mean, if it's a lake or something like that, and people want to come use the lake, they could pay a small admission fee. I mean, and who's to say that that everything would arise into eternal warfare and conflict? Like, who's to say that is what happened? I don't think we can predict exactly what would happen.
I think we can, just by looking at the different ideologies that people hold, the different groups that exist, and all the different statist factions. I don't think there's any way they're ever going to accept anarcho-capitalism. I think that they're all willing to use violence. They're all willing to organize. So, like, in order to get past the state, like, I don't think it'll ever wither away. I think you have to actually go to war with statists, and that would be a civil war. And then, even if you won, then you would be the new governing or dominant faction in that area instead of them. They would be subject to ANCAP rule. This would be the progressives and the statists. So you would actually become the new government. I see it as a vacuum that's impossible to maintain. I think some group always fills and always takes control of that land.
Okay. What I would say is maybe, just maybe, allow others to take that risk. And if it works, hey man, that's fantastic. If it doesn't, you are right all wrong.
You're asking,
and they're going to move back and they're going to pay taxes to your state.
The risk you want to take is actually challenging the authority of the government. So you're talking about fighting police, fighting the National Guard, and fighting the military. I mean, it leads directly to violence with the state, because you're an anarchist. The state is the enemy. The state is an enemy gang of aggressors. So your ideology leads directly to violence against the state.
So whether
Go ahead. In defense.
Yeah, I mean, but you would call it defense, but regardless, it would still be a civil war situation.
You don't feel defense is morally justified?
I mean, I do, but I don't think that. I think this is a really different situation when you're talking about overthrowing a government and you're calling it defense.
I mean,
but it's like, all right,
like, isn't it the most morally justified of any sort of violence would be defense?
Not, I mean, I guess, you know. So, do you think it's morally justified then to kill police and soldiers and stuff like that? I mean, and politicians that guy that just shot up the baseball game.
Well, no, I mean,
the response to a violation does not negate or right or wrong the course we're talking about. The response, there are a lot of strategic considerations to response. I think the police are wrong to break down my door to search for drugs. I am not going to take up arms against them when they do that. So there are matters of strategy. I said that. I watch SNL too much. Strategy. I mean,
if you're willing to take up arms in defense of your ideology, it means you're willing to engage in violent revolution against government agents.
Damn, I guess so.
Yeah, so that's why I say anarchy is chaos, because it means anarchists are going to be fighting against statists, and I just don't think that's the right path. And the other thing that gets me with you guys is this is moral, that is moral, like, you know, you're declaring your stuff is moral, and that really kind of screws you up if you don't think that having police is moral, whereas I think it is moral. So we have a disagreement over what's moral and what's not moral, but now we're really getting into philosophy.
Well, no, but here's what I don't think is moral about cops, you know. You know, we've got the largest incarceration rate in the world. You know, I believe it's the last number I saw. It's like 77% of people in prisons are in there because of nonviolent drug crimes.
I thought that's high. I thought it was like 50, but whatever.
Okay, well, either way. And then 1 in 6 people who are in prison are in there for marijuana.
Yeah, but you have to understand, it's not just the government that wants that. You have a lot of people, a lot of citizens, your neighbors and friends are prohibitionists. They support anti-drug laws. And so when you live in a community that wants that, you're not just battling the authorities, you're battling public opinion. So that's why it's very hard for us, even to get marijuana legalized in Maryland for recreational uses. It's a huge hurdle. But we're not just appealing to legislators, we're appealing to our fellow citizens and saying, you know, we want this is why we want it. You have to change public opinion. You know, not just shoot the cops that go to enforce prohibition laws. They're following the law that was passed by elected legislators, which is supported by the community.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like with you're giving one standard for minarchism that you are not allowing to our anarchist position. And you said several times that, hey, it relies, we got to have public opinion. Hey, man, people want weed dealers to be arrested. That's why it's happening. You know, we have to
deal
collectively
with that.
and, you know, kind of elevate our, ethical
we have to change their
understanding.
minds.
But whenever, and especially when I think anarchists have economics on their side, in addition to the moral rule, as soon as there's any disagreement, not even just a huge minority or something like that, but when there's any disagreement, the possibility of disagreement is why it's impossible. But you don't even allow that standard for minarchism, with where you're saying, hey, we're going to solve social problems with this complete, total state that only a few people have the ability to decide what goes on with it or not. So anyway, I'll stop rambling.
You know, it would need to be a classical liberal or libertarian society, or we would at least have to be the majority so that we could, have our laws, and the prohibitionists, unfortunately for them, would not get their laws. So they would still be there. There's always going to be people that think marijuana should be banned and, homosexuality should be banned, but you just have to outnumber them, and you have to control the law.
No, but one thing I don't like that you said is you don't need a majority. That's totally false. Once again, you can have a tireless minority.
We got to win the elections. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Like,
yeah, but isn't it like half the people eligible to vote?
Yeah, I mean the non-voters don't really play a role. And then
out of the people to vote, say if you were in like the Libertarian Party, you would only need like how much of a percentage to win it,
Yeah.
Like, so it's really like not even like 30% of the eligible voters that you would need to win it.
So you're saying minarchism is even easier to achieve than I thought it was?
Yeah. Well, pretty much. You because you don't really need a majority.
Yeah. It's still pretty tough. But you're right. You need a majority. You just need enough to actually win and get our people elected, people who believe in minarchism.
Mm-hmm. Was it the 3%ers, the Patriot Group? Because they referenced I think it's a historical fact that only 3% of the colonies took up arms, and that was enough, so...
Yeah, I really don't recommend. I know Augustus Invictus is a big fan of the violent revolution and killing politicians. I really think this is a big mistake. I think we should go the political route. There's just keep trying. You have to do stupid stuff, like you have to have booths at county fairs, and you have to be present. You have to show up. Half of politics is just showing up, which libertarians and ANCAPs are traditionally not very good at. We're vocal online, but, if I host a meeting, 3 people show up. So it's frustrating. It's like, where is everybody? Coming to the next one?
Coming to the next...
the next party meeting?
The next party meeting for which party?
LP.
For the LP.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That could be cool.
Yeah?
I'd be interested in doing that.
Yeah. They're usually kind of social. We just drink and talk.
When do the meetings normally happen? Like, what day of the week?
Like between Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, whichever one's most convenient. Like,
cool.
Usually at a restaurant.
Sweet. Okay. So, and then I think final tonight on the topics board we have sex for rent.
Yeah, this was one where I saw a video. It was BBC, and they were saying that it's a deal where the woman, instead of paying rent, agrees to have sex with the landlord. And some of the women on the video were complaining about the frequency that they were demanding sex, and they felt, like I have to comply in order to keep my place, or I'll get evicted. But at the same time, they kind of adopted that because they're like, hey, I can live rent free, and all I have to do is sleep with this guy. And I think contractually they should have clarified the terms a little bit better so that they knew, what they were really getting into. But to me, that's a consenting adult and a consenting adult, and it shouldn't be outlawed. But of course, they're interviewing lawmakers and they want to ban the practice or whatever. But yeah, does everyone here pro prostitution?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, sex work is work.
sex work is work. And so that's what it is. It's basically prostitution. Instead of getting paid in money, you're getting paid in free place to live, but it's still compensation for service. So I just think they needed to outline those contracts a little bit better so they weren't dissatisfied. One party wasn't dissatisfied with the arrangement.
Right. It should absolutely be a contractual thing, and that people should take the time to do that. But I think still at the end of the day, like if a woman gets into that situation and then says, "Well, I don't have anywhere to go, and he wants to fuck me too many times, and it's this and that." I mean, you made that decision to begin with to enter into that agreement, whether you had it written on a contract or not.
Or if a man got into that situation. No, I mean, like, why couldn't it exist the other way too?
Yeah. Oh, it totally could. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, no doubt it does.
But then, I mean, if she's unhappy with it, I mean, I don't know how you would, I guess at that point,
she's got to end the relationship.
Yeah, but she has to leave.
Out.
Yeah,
she has to move out.
Because you can't make a civil case out of that if there's no contract or anything. So,
yeah,
that's the other thing. If the whole thing is illegal, then you can't take a dispute to the courts or whatever.
Right.
It's a crazy story. You see that it's like BBC something on Facebook, but it was rent for sex.
Well, hey man, I know I have something to fall back on if the whole career thing doesn't work, so that's good to know.
Got that going for me. Right.
So yeah, I think that's about it for tonight. Until next time, remember we've got t-shirts over at libertariancountry.com. If you type in the coupon code PRL, you'll receive a 10% discount. Also, we're always accepting article submissions up at the dailyliberator.com. And until next time, live free.
Or die.
The blood that is shed, drenching the flags on the tax bombs in red. Was its way of viewing the expense of the many, soldiers and gods in a death machine. You can't justify killing by economic gain. For God, country, and democracy, you can put freedom in gunpoint in a foreign land. You support the troops, then bring them home. I believe that you will do the best for you, and I believe that we have the power, I hate the state, and I know I'm a slave. We can make the break the power. Society owes individuals nothing more than non-interference with natural rights. Once a virtuous person fully comprehends the non-aggression principle, the violence of the state becomes absolute.